is our, Kim, this is the 24th? 23rd Lava Salon. We're so happy to be here at La Noce de Figaro. This is the old Shaper's Cafeteria. And this is a great space up here. And Jonathan has been very kind to give us this space, and we're so glad we can fill it. Things that I want to throw out there, just because you're here and I have an audience. Crime Lab. Lava does many things. One thing Lava does every 4 times a year is we have a crime lab at the Crime Lab at Cal State Los Angeles. It's April 21. Nick Guskos is going to talk about gang crime. It's a lot of fun. The end of the month, 20th. Okay, well, it's a lot of fun. Okay, gang crime isn't fun, but if you're interested in how people solve crimes, it's a lot of fun. If you're interested in what federal prosecutors do to bring about indictments against members of organized crime, it's really interesting. So that's what it is. Amy, you know it's a lot of fun.
It's the blast.
It's great. Okay. At the end of the month, April 27th, just down the street at the Los Angeles Athletic Club, we're having a literary salon about Dashiell Hammett, with Dashiell Hammett's granddaughter. And she's going to talk about her grandfather and what DPC was and his literary estate. It's going to be a lot of fun. So maybe you can make those. Maybe we'll see you there. Marc Chevalier, are you ready?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, we've got, why don't you just stand up so people know what you look like, because you're going to sit there and talk.
Okay.
Okay, so everyone, this is Marc, and he's, and you're going to talk about, and you're going to talk about this man whose name is on the screen, James Oviatt.
Right.
Okay, so sit down.
Why is he going to sit down and talk?
He said he wanted to.
How am I going to film you doing that?
Because then it's like I'm in my own home, I'm relaxed, otherwise I'd be having to look here, look there, look at their chair up.
Why don't you put your chair up there? Could you do that?
Chair up. Oh, God. But I have to use a point or two. Oh.
Make my life a little easier, why don't you?
Okay.
Oh,
so Marc, here you go.
Okay.
Okay, wait a minute. How am I going to film you and that?
You're not Kim. So let it go. It's not going to happen to him.
What do you want me to do?
I don't know. Could you sit over there?
Okay.
Not everyone can be here. It is Easter.
Here or there?
There. There. Thank you. This is for people who can't be here. Oh. Thank you, my dear.
Well, welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. As you said, my name is Marc Chevalier, and I'm going to talk about this man named James Oviatt. Not Oviatt, which sounds a little more sophisticated, but Oviatt. That's how it's pronounced, where he comes from. The reason why I'm talking about this is because I'm sort of the unofficial, self-proclaimed, I guess, Oviatt historian. I'm an English teacher by profession, but for many, many years I've been interested in the Oviatt Building in downtown, a couple blocks from here. I did some research, and then I did some more research. I made a documentary on the history of the building in 2008, and now I'm writing a book about James Oviatt, his life and times. So that's what we're going to talk about. Who is this man? Well, I'm going to start. Sorry. Okay. I'll start with a quote by somebody else because it sort of covers what we're going to look at today. A fellow named Joe Litton recently said, Los Angeles has always attracted certain people whose dreams and abilities are on steroids. These people are larger than life and need to exist outside the box in order to flourish. They carry bazookas of ambition and talent while the rest of us are armed with water pistols. They are one-offs, unique in what they add to the world. I'll follow that with a quote by this man himself, James Oviatt, from the early 1920s. Oviatt said, Los Angeles gets what it wants, when it wants it. Los Angeles wanted a movie industry. Today, it's the 5th largest in the world. Los Angeles wanted to build more hotel. Is there a city in the world that has a better one? No amount of energy or money will win Los Angeles' acceptance of what it does not want. The city is generous in its approval. mercilessly just in its disapproval. Those words were turn out to be prophetic for James Oviatt many years later. This is the man on the screen. At the age of 16, it's the youngest photo that we have of him. He would grow to be a merchant prince of Los Angeles. Quite extraordinary. Fits in the Hall of Fame, but also in the Hall of Shame. So who is he? Where is he from? James Oviatt was born in 1888 in a little town in Utah called Farmington. Utah was changing quite a bit in those days. 1888, it was a few years away from becoming a state. It was moving very rapidly away from being a communal Mormon territory, where everybody sort of helped each other out, you could say. They had their own industries. It was moving into a rapidly commercial, outward-looking place. James Oviatt's grandfather was a Mormon pioneer. He got to Farmington in the 1850s, and he became a blacksmith and wagon wheel maker. And that was a pretty important thing to be in those days in Utah. And that's because people were moving in and they were moving through the land, and they needed to have their wagons repaired. They needed to have their horses shoed. So Grandpa was an important man in this community of Farmington. Grandpa's son also became a blacksmith, and the son was the father of James Oviatt. Farmington was a community where the people on top owned small cattle ranches, and everybody else was pretty much either a farmer or a tradesman. When Oviatt was born in 1888, things were changing very quickly, even in Farmington. The blacksmith was no longer one of the useful people of the town. He was moving down in rank, you could say. The people who had businesses in Salt Lake City and abroad were becoming the top people in the town of Farmington. So the star was setting on the Oviatt family when James Oviatt was born. He was the youngest son. He had 4 sisters and 2 brothers. He lost his mother to pneumonia at the age of 3, and he lost his brother, his older brother, who he was very close to, just a few years later. James Oviatt was raised by his eldest sister. At the age of 15, she had to raise all the other younger kids. And that was fine, because it was a pious Mormon family, very calm, except for this guy. From the very beginning, he did not get along with everybody else. He was different. He was different. Give you one example. At the age of 8, Mormon children are expected to be baptized and confirmed. You can't force the child to do it. You have to convince the child, but most children go along with it. James Oviatt was not baptized and confirmed into the Mormon church until he was 9 1/2. It took a year and a half to get this guy to do it, and that's because he resisted. He was never devout. He was what you call a Jack Mormon, which means that his later life he smoked and he drank and he raised hell. When James Oviatt was 15, he started to work for the first time in his eldest brother Louis Oviatt's general store. He also began to sneak off from the house at night and go to the local saloons. He would take what little money he was earning from the store and he would gamble it at the racetrack. There was a racetrack and there was a saloon in Farmington. It was attached to a kind of amusement park there. So, family said, well, you don't get along with us, we don't get along with you, what's going to happen? Oviatt graduates from high school at the age of 16, normal at the time. He moves to Salt Lake City with his second eldest sister and her husband. And he gets a job as a window dresser at a department store there. And joins every club you can imagine at the age of 16. Becomes the youngest treasurer in every club that he joins. Then it's 1909. We're moving ahead now. We're moving a few years ahead. One of the clubs he's in, the Elks Club, is going to take a little trip to Los Angeles, have a convention there. Oviatt gets on the train with his fellow elves. He sees Los Angeles, he sees all the sights, and he says, that's it. This is the place for me. When all the other elves get back on the train to go back home to Salt Lake City, he doesn't go back. He stays in LA, has almost no money, has no job, and he starts walking up and down these streets where we are today, the streets of LA. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, I went a little bit too far ahead. On the left is the blacksmith shop that James Oviatt's father had, pretty humble looking. And on the right is the dry goods store where Oviatt had his first job. And it really would affect the rest of his life because it led him in the direction of merchandising. Next slide, please. There's downtown LA, pretty much as James Oviatt knew it. It was a Victorian place that was quickly changing, growing bigger, architecture was changing. And on the right is Desmond's department store, the oldest department store in LA. After pounding the streets a bit, Oviatt found a job there as a window dresser. He was earning $4 a week, but it was something, and he was working 17-hour days. Pretty much doing all the windows and all the interiors in that department store. Good. He found a room in a boarding house on Bunker Hill, just like a lot of other people did in those days when they were coming from outside. Let's go to the next slide. Moving a few years ahead now, from 1909 to 1912, Oviatt rises quickly in his profession. He's no longer just a window dresser, he is the head of the window dressing department at Desmond's. He's the guy in the middle now. He's growing a bit. He meets a fellow named Frank Alexander, who was a hat salesman at Desmond's. Frank Alexander was a hat salesman with a difference. He married a very wealthy woman, Hattie Bradford, from a baking family, a baking fortune. And Frank Alexander and Jane Oviatt decided in 1912, we're going to get out of this place and we're going to start our own little men's store business. But we really don't have any money because Frank Alexander's wife's family would not give money. They helped Frank Alexander get into all kinds of nice men's clubs and golf clubs, but no money. So where can Alexander and Oviatt find money for their new little store? They turn to the guy on the right, Frank Shaver Allen, F.S. Allen. If you know anything about architectural history, you might have heard this guy. Frank F.S. Allen was a great architect from Illinois who came to Pasadena and started a whole career in Pasadena building public schools around Southern California. He also became the head of the Tournament of Roses for a few years, had a lot of parties in his beautiful Pasadena home with his wife and children. And then he got caught up in a sex scandal involving a young man many, many years younger than himself. And that was the end of his career. That was the end of his wife or his family. He still had a lot of money. He was very wealthy. And he decided to invest it in these two handsome young men in their business. He was the silent partner. We really don't know much except that he provided the money and then disappeared from their business. The little store was going to be called Alexander and Oviatt, and it was going to be located in the shabbiest little place you've ever seen. Let's change the slide. Right there. Now, right there, I mean where that arrow is in the picture on the left. Not the big building there. A really shabby little late 1800s hole in the wall.
Mark, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Where was this? This was next to the Winchester?
No, this was near the corner of 4th Street and Spring.
Oh, okay.
Now, that's the thing. It's a hole in the wall, but it's the best location you could ever have for a clothing store because it's in the center of the banking district. You've got literally a few steps away the first skyscraper in Los Angeles, the Continental Building. You've got across the street from that the Hellman Building, where the stock exchange was located. You've got the Cafe Bristol, which was the best restaurant in downtown LA. Everything is there. And then you have the Angeles Hotel, the best hotel, right across the street, literally facing, the side entrance facing this little tiny store. So from the very beginning, Alexander and Oviatt start to get wealthy bankers as their clients. Why? Because they only sell good stuff. Imported men's clothing and furnishings from England and from France in this little hole. From the very beginning, they have a profit, and they move on and they move on, and they get more and more successful. At the same time, James Oviatt, the same year, joins the Los Angeles Athletic Club, and he moves in to the 12th floor. That's a good idea. Because when you lived in the Los Angeles Athletic Club, you had access all the time to the people who lived there and who were members. And he got them to come to the store too. They became customers, including some very early movie people. Charlie Chaplin, he lived at the Athletic Club. Douglas Fairbanks, a bunch of movie studio executives. They become the customers. Let's see what I can tell you. Well, the profits are so great that by 1923, just 11 years later, the store's income is 12 times greater than it was at its founding. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, things start to get better. Just 3 years after that little store was started, it got too big for its britches, and so Alexander Oviatt began to move. They moved to a building 2 blocks down on Hill and 6th, called the Consolidated Realty Building, about 9 or 10 stories high. And this is what their new store looked like. Very, very fancy. Their frontage, they eventually took over the street-level frontage of the whole building facing Hill Street, 60-foot frontage. Interior design, beautiful, 17th century Jacobean style. Heavy dark oak, leather, oriental carpets, that sort of thing. James Oviatt also ramps up his attracting of new customers. He goes off in 1916 to something I know Wendy never heard of, a citizens military training camp. Yeah. In 1916, very wealthy Los Angeles businessmen decided they wanted to know how to shoot guns and throw weaponry. So they went to a training camp that they organized along with the U.S. Army near Monterey Beach. Oviatt goes too because he knows how wealthy these men are. The campgrounds adjoined the Del Monte Hotel, which had polo, tennis, golf, a private beach, horseback riding, boating, and ballroom dances. All of these were available to the capitalists in khaki after they had been training with weapons during the day. They drove up in their Rolls Royces to do this. Oviatt himself was not yet a millionaire, though he'd be soon, but he used the camp to connect with the others who were. Then World War I comes. 1917, James Oviatt is sort of forced to join up. He goes to the San Pedro submarine base. He's a seaman 4th class. Within a few months, he's chief yeoman, one of the highest positions you could get. After the war, he comes back and says, wow, I really have a taste of myself. I see I am now a leader. Let's reorganize this business. It's no longer really Alexander Oviatt. It's now going to be Oviatt, another guy who's vice president, and Alexander, who's now the secretary-treasurer. The name stays the same. Let's go to the next slide. Things ramp up even more. It's now 1920. World War I is over, Europe is in a shambles, and prices for European goods are very, very cheap. It's a good time to go on a buying trip. Before this, Alexander Oviatt had relied on go-betweens to get their merchandise, but Oviatt wants to now go himself. And so he does, and look at how he does it. He gets on the Olympic, which was the Titanic's sister ship. Very fancy ship. When he arrives, he buys in Europe, he buys a car. He drives in the car all over the back roads of England, Scotland, Ireland, France, Italy, Switzerland, Belgium, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. Why? He's searching for the best weavers, crofters, embroiderers, bead workers, dyers, and leather workers. He wants to buy their stuff, he wants to commission them to make stuff for his store. He also finds the time to go to Royal Ascot races in England. That's him on the right. He's attending the Royal Ascot. Yeah, staying at the best hotels. He's gambling in Monte Carlo. He's living it up. And he does this for 3 months over here. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Did he bring anyone with him?
No, he went all by himself. He did this all alone. Alexander is now only secretary-treasurer, so he stays behind, and he has his family too. But Oviatt is still a single man. And then something happens. Oh my goodness, what happens? Frank Alexander, his partner, who'd been demoted, but still was important to the business, he dies. Frank Alexander dies from a shaving cut. It becomes a blood infection that's not detected by doctors. And after a week of intense agony, he passes away. That's a big change. Because Frank Alexander, though he'd been demoted, still owned, at this point, more than half of the business. So soon after Alexander has his funeral, James Oviatt approaches his widow and says, I know that you're not good at handling money. I know you don't know business. I can do both. I'll make a deal with you. You have the majority shares of the stock. You have the power to vote at the shareholders meeting. If you agree to let me have my way and be the boss, if you always vote my way, I will take care of your money for you. I'll invest it. I'll give you an allowance. I'll buy you a new car whenever you need a new car. I'll educate your kids in private schools. And she says yes. Okay, it's a good deal. So she sort of goes along with the program. Oviatt is now essentially, he's in charge of everything at this point. And that's good for him because he gets to do what he wants to do. Let's go to the next slide. I wonder, yeah, Schwab's Pharmacy, what does this have to do with anything? First thing, Oviatt decides in 1923 to do two things. One is he wants a branch store. His Hollywood customers, the early movie stars, they're moving away from the Hollywood, or rather from the older neighborhoods, and they're moving into the Hollywood Hills. He wants a store near them so they don't have to travel to downtown. And where does he choose his store to be? Well, it's on the corner of Sunset and, anybody know?
Crescent Heights.
La Cienega? Sunset? No,
Crescent.
Sunset and Crescent Heights, that's right. That's right, a newly constructed shopping building. And where is it going to be there? Right there where the arrow is, right there on the corner, which is, I guess, it's the northeast corner. Well, things fall through, and he doesn't end up opening the store in 1923. Southeast, thank you, you're correct. He doesn't end up opening the store. But 9 years later, somebody else does come along and take the space. Schwab's Pharmacy, the famous Schwab's drugstore, where all the movie stars congregated. So if it had been an Oviatt store, things might have been very different in Hollywood history. Who knows? Okay, next please. Also in 1923, business is just going gangbusters. Oviatt decides he wants his own building because it's real estate time. Downtown real estate is booming, it's hot, and skyscrapers are the hottest thing of all. So James Oviatt chooses an area called the Coleman Tract, which is on near the corner of 6th and Olive. Very nice Irish-American lady named Margaret Coleman owns the tract. And he says, I would like to build a building here. Can I buy your tract? She says, no, but you can rent it from me. Oh, okay. So he takes out a 50-year lease on the Coleman Tract with an option to renew for 25 more. And that's where the arrow is. What is he going to build? A 12-story skyscraper with a penthouse at the top. That's the first design for it on the right. And it looks Italian Renaissance. Nothing very out of the extraordinary or different. Pretty much in the spirit of the early 1920s. Yeah, go faster, I imagine. No,
but also, what's across the street from this Coleman Tract?
Across the street from the Coleman Tract, I think at that point in the 1923 is the Booze Brothers or Bose Brothers Cafeteria.
But he lives across the street at the athletic club.
Yes, that's right. Oviatt lives across the street down at the corner of 7th and
Well, the
Olive.
photograph's probably taken from its roof, actually.
It probably was taken from the roof of the Los Angeles Athletic Club, the photo on the left. That's right. That's right. And the architects are Albert Walker and Percy Eisen. They are rapidly becoming the busiest architects in downtown Los Angeles. Prolific, they're good, they do things on budget. So that's the plan. Does it get built in 1923? No, it takes more time. It takes time to raise money before it gets built. Let's change. Roaring 20s, really beginning to roar now. Oviatt is going a little bit crazy. Golfing is his passion, and it's also his business, because in the 1920s, you did business on the golf links more than anywhere else. Starting through the Los Angeles Athletic Club, Oviatt becomes a member of the Riverside Country Club. Then he joins Annandale, then Lakeside, then Hillcrest. He's a regular at amateur championship tournaments as a golfer and spectator. In 1927, he paid $4,000 in cash for the privilege of, quote-unquote, owning golf champion George Von Elm at a single tournament. $4,000 in 1927. It was a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money now. He played with George Von Elm, great golfer, Walter Hagen, greater golfer, Leo Diebel, great golfer, and even Bobby Jones. Oviatt played a practical joke on Bobby Jones that was so famous, so outrageous, that it got a full article in the New York Times. He's also getting into a little bit of hot water with his liquor. See, because Oviatt, living in the LA Athletic Club, he kept his liquor there too. You needed liquor to entertain your friends. I think it was in 1924, the LA Police Department raided the LA Athletic Club. And they found in its basement storerooms $100,000 worth of illegal hooch. Owned by the members. Owned by the members. Who kept it down there in boxes with their names on it. Not too smart. Well, Oviatt was a smart guy, because a couple weeks before Prohibition had taken into effect, he had bought a lot of liquor. He'd imported it from Europe mostly, and he had all the permits for it. He could do that, as long as he didn't sell it. So when the LAPD said, "What do you have here?" he said, "Oh, it's all legal. Here are the papers." And all his friends had their liquor confiscated, and then he provided them with his own. He got into business with it. He's investing like crazy at this point. He invests in signal oil ventures, silver mining explorations near Death Valley. Joins Albert Walker and Percy Eisen in financing a residential area next to Pasadena Golf Course. And, Beverly Crest, yeah. He had a big section of Beverly Crest in Beverly Hills when it just opened up. But the greatest of all was there in the picture on the right, the Royal Palms. This was a behemoth, planned behemoth of a beach hotel club and golf course on the cliffs near Palos Verdes. It was going to have a clubhouse more than 2 blocks long, a 1,000-person dining room, 2 Olympic-sized indoor pools, a 350-acre private park, 2 18-hole golf courses, dozens of tennis, squash, and handball courts, a mile-long seaside promenade, and a 3,600-foot-long private beach. Sounds great, right? Except for they started in 1927. They didn't really start building until 1929, and then the Great Depression hit. So, great investments at the end of the 20s usually meant you lost your shirt a few years later. Oviatt lost his shirt, and almost all the investments he made in those years. Let's go to the next slide. All right, we've moved a few years ahead. We're now in 1927. Oviatt has finally gotten the capital that he needs to build his building. He's sold all kinds of gold-backed bonds. And he's got the lease on the Coleman track he's been paying. Walker and Eisen have changed the design of the building. It's no longer Italian Renaissance, it's Italian Romanesque. They went back a few centuries. It now has a tower on it. What's the tower for? The tower holds the elevator motors. But the tower also makes the building taller than the height limit of the time. Height limit was about 12 stories. You could get around that if you built something useful, like a tower that had elevator motors in it. We've also got the penthouse at the top. You see the red roof there? That's where his penthouse was going to be. And at the very bottom is where the store is going to be. It's going to be 2 stories high, and you have a nice striped canvas awning. The rest of the building is going to be business offices, but not just for you and me. This is for doctors, dentists, lawyers, stockbrokers, real estate investors, you know, people who pay high rent, that sort of thing. On the right, you have a little detail for the design of the elevator car. Again, Italian Romanesque, lots of little swirly things. Nothing Art Deco. You may have heard that the Oviatt is an Art Deco building. Sort of. But at this point, nothing Art Deco is planned for the Oviatt building. Let's go to the next slide. The building started construction in June 1927, and that happened to coincide with James Oviatt's annual summer buying trip to Europe. He goes every summer, you know. But this time he's going with a wad of cash. And he's not just going to buy clothes and textiles, he's going to buy things for his new building and his penthouse. When he gets to Paris, he hears about this beautiful, beautiful new frontage for an old department store there called the Galeries Lafayette. The frontage was made of glass panels, thousands and thousands and thousands, and they were all lighted from within. And not just regular lights, color wheels of lights, so that it would change at night, the lighting from red to blue to green to yellow. This is a big deal. Oviatt falls in love with this frontage. He walks in the store, and he finds out there's a design studio in the department store. It's called La Matrice. It's run by a French designer who loves this new thing called Art Deco. And he's got all kinds of artists and craftsmen working under him, making furniture and everything else you can imagine for the home. Oviatt falls in love with this, and he says, I'm going to buy everything I need for my new building, my new store, my new penthouse from this one place. Almost everything. And so he does. Let's go to the next page, the next slide. The fellow who's the creative director of this design studio in the department store introduces James Oviatt to Rene Lalique. And yeah, I'm sure you've heard of Rene Lalique. He was the most famous glass designer and glassmaker in the world at that time. Lalique had started off in the early 1900s and had really started moving into Art Deco in the 1920s. He did perfume bottles, he did jewelry, he did vases and little objects, and he was also beginning to get into architectural motifs. Oviatt meets Lalique, they get along, and Oviatt says, I want you to do some things for my new building. I want you to design the biggest pieces of glass you've ever made. The one in the middle, there were actually 2 of them. Those were panels to doors that would go onto the front of the Oviatt building. That piece of glass there is 7.5 feet high. It weighed tons, I don't remember how many tons, but it weighed tons. And Oviatt and Lalique designed it together. Those are 2 angels holding a mission bell. The angels represent the city of the angels. The mission bell represents Los Angeles' Mexican past. And this is going to be the logo for the Oviatt building. Lalique also designs panels for the elevator doors of the building being made. You can see them on the left. Lalique designs another set of front doors for the Oviatt building on the upper right. You can just see the letter service, and below that it says Alexander Oviatt. Top left, that's a panel from a gigantic wall clock that was in the interior, would be in the interior of the store. Let's go to the next slide. For Oviatt's Penthouse, he chooses, again through the department store, a couple of cabinet makers named Sallier et Fils. And Sallier and Fils were very famous at the time. They were heavily into Art Deco as well. Oviatt sees these interiors done by Sallier et Fils at an exhibition called the 1927 Salon des Artistes Décorateurs, which is a decorating exhibition. Oviatt looks at these and says, I want pretty much all of it. Make it for me, we'll ship it over, and we'll put this in my penthouse. And sure enough, almost everything that you see in these 2 pictures of these things exhibited in Paris ended up in James Oviatt's penthouse.
Where are they now?
Well, most of them have been scattered to the winds. They were sold off after Oviatt died in 1974. The bar on the right is still in the Oviatt Penthouse because it was a set-in piece. And a bed that I haven't shown a photo of is also still in the Oviatt Penthouse. Let's go to the next. Alright, and then the pièce de résistance. Oviatt decides he needs a new car. And so, he goes to a couple of coachmakers named Hibbert and Darren, who made they designed cars for the elites. And he says, I'm going to buy one of the most expensive cars in the world, a Hispano-Suiza. And I'm going to buy the biggest car they make, the H6B town car. And I want you to make the coachwork for it. And so they did. It was dark brown in color, it was a behemoth in size, and it cost James Oviatt about $24,000 in 1927. An absolute fortune. They build it. At the end of the summer, Oviatt picks it up and he starts driving all around Paris in it, showing off, and then he ships it to the United States where it gets stuck in customs for a year. Yeah, he had to pay a high tariff. By the time he pays off the tariff, the stock market is about to crash. The stock market crashes, Oviatt gets into trouble, and he needs to figure out how to make money. So one thing he decides to do is to lease the car to the movie studios. Are we doing the time, Richard?
We have about 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll be fine. So in the early 30s, this big car ends up being used in a bunch of Hollywood movies, including one that you may know of. It's called Grand Hotel. It was, I think, made in 32, but it was the Best Picture Oscar winner for that year or the following year. It's the car that the star of the movie has, and throughout the movie she keeps trying to get to it, but she never does. At the very end of the movie, she finally gets into her car and is driven off. That's the car. You see it on the right in a still from the movie. Katharine Hepburn, when she arrived in Hollywood, she wanted to make a splash for herself, so she rented the car for her personal use. She was driven all over. She hired a chauffeur whose, quote, I quote from her, whose dark brown skin matched the color of the car. And she thought she was, you know, the hot potato until everybody laughed at her, because all of Hollywood knew this was a rental car. They'd seen it all in the movies, they'd worked with it in the movies, and she was just making a fool of herself. So she drove it for about a week after they'd started making fun of her, and then she ditched it. Let's go to the next slide. So while Oviatt is in Europe having fun, the building starts to be constructed. It took a long time. It should have opened around January or February 1928, but Oviatt was making changes to it from Europe, driving Walker and Eisen a little bit crazy. For instance, the tower. Remember the tower? You might have noticed that the design had a tower with a balcony. Well, Oviatt, when he was in Paris, bought a giant clock. And he said, I want it to be a clock tower now, not a balcony. And I want it to be neon, so everybody can see it from everywhere. So they had to redesign the balcony in order, or rather the tower, in order to accommodate the clock. And then something else happened. Remember I told you that Oviatt had fallen in love with that entranceway to the department store, that big glass thing with the lights? Well, he loved it so much that he hired the man who designed it and the man who did the glass and said, I want you to do it for me. Make me a smaller version of it and I'll bring it all here to LA and put it into my building. And that's exactly what happened. They designed the same thing, maybe even better, for his building. At the same time, Oviatt has these Los Angeles interior designers working for him. Field in Paradise, Joseph Field, who did the chocolate shop, if you're familiar with it, 1914. Well, Field had been working with Oviatt for some time in his previous store, and Oviatt said, you will have to do the interior design for this store. Oviatt cables Field from Europe and says, I found out about this great glass entranceway, and I want one for me. Come right now to Paris. I'll pay all your expenses. Sail over here, and we're going to work on redesigning this. So Field comes over on his ship. He arrives. Oviatt says, I want this new Art Deco in my store. You've got to find a way to put it in. And Field says, that's great. What's Art Deco? It was so new, he really didn't know about it. He didn't know how to design it. He didn't know the rules. So he says to Oviatt, I got to teach myself. I'm going to have to buy expensive art books and design books right now. And they're going to be expensive, and you have to pay for them. And Oviatt says, fine. Joseph Field buys up all the art books and Art Deco he can get. He studies, he learns, he teaches himself. And sure enough, when they go back to LA at the end of the summer, he redesigns the store interior. It was going to be English, Jacobean, dark woods, very traditional. He starts putting Art Deco into it. Well, this served Joseph Field very well because the following year, in 1928, he was hired by Bullock's department store to help design the interior of Bullock's wheelchair. Why was he hired to be one of the designers? Because he was one of the only LA people who could do Art Deco. Thanks to James Oviatt and the books. All right, let's change the slide.
Oh, Mark,
yeah.
Because you mentioned Bullock, there was huge competition between Parkinson and Walker and Eisen about the design of Bullock's culture, and Field was hired away, as was the other head designer of Walker and Eisen.
Yes.
It was really a very big deal that Walker and Eisen lost both their head designers.
Interesting. Thank you for mentioning it. And this is what the Oviatt store entrance looked like. It's really an outdoor lobby or an arcade. That's how it looked when they put it together, and the store opened in 1928. 5 architects and engineers had to come from Paris to LA in order to assemble this. It was extremely complicated to do. Thousands of pieces of glass, 12 tons worth of glass in the ceiling. And I've colorized this. I should point right here a little bit to show you that all those pieces that you see that look like they may have had color, they all had these oranges, these burgundy-colored reds, golds, and so on and so forth. It was very beautiful. There were also color wheels, just like at the department store. Red to blue to green. Okay, let's...
No, wait, before
yeah.
So we can walk over and look at this.
No, you cannot, because almost all this is gone. This lasted until the late 60s, and then it was torn out. If we have time, we'll get into that. I'll get into it.
Does the Galeries Lafayette still look like this?
No, that was torn out in the early 60s. Yeah, that was torn out too, and that disappeared. Just to let you know that in this picture, you can't really see here, but this is the entranceway to the store. Again, from the outside, there were 28 display cases here. So you were surrounded by Oviatt store merchandise as you went in. To the left is one of the elevators right here. Let's go on. Because now I'm kind of rushing here. And the store's opened. It's now May 1928. This is the ground floor and mezzanine of the store. What are you looking at here, huh? Well, let me get my laser pointer and we can really see. Well, what you're seeing here at the top, these, is actually 3 giant chandeliers that were designed by Rene Lalique for the store. And they represented upside-down California palm trees. Yes. Can you try to imagine that? Yeah, well, they were very stylized. Otherwise, you've got a big giant room. You've got the area, the sportswear areas here. The mezzanine upstairs has some women's wear. And overall, lots of oak wood here. Lots of oriental carpeting. And it's hard to see, but there are Art Deco elements. Here you have some Art Deco design. You've got Art Deco design around here. It's been incorporated into it, but it hasn't completely changed the very traditional design of the store inside. Let's go to the next slide. And what could you buy from there? We haven't talked much about the merchandise. Well, it's more than just clothes at this point. You could buy for $1,000 in 1928 You could dye alligator suitcases, which pretty much still look like the alligators. In fact, one side of the suitcase had the back of the alligator, the other side had the head. Yes, you could. You could buy a so-called beverage case. This is because we're still in Prohibition. The code word for alcohol is beverage. You have to always say beverage. For beverages, I don't know, what, lemonade? I don't know. What could you have this? This is done in exotic hardwoods, and this piece right here was selling for $2,000. $2,000, 1928. This is an income, this is a year's income for somebody. And then at the bottom, you could also buy a bottle of perfume that was designed by Rene Lalique for the store itself. There are the two angels holding the mission bell, and the whole thing is shaped like a mission bell. And this little bottle of perfume would cost you $25. That's a lot of money. $25. $25 could buy you a couple of suits in those days. Let's go to the next slide. Oviatt is ready to move into his penthouse at the top. His penthouse has 12 rooms. It has 2 bedrooms, a master and a guest. Has the most beautiful bathroom you've ever seen. I'm not showing it here. And look, all the furniture, every stick of it, everything you see here has come from Paris. All of it imported. In fact, Oviatt imported 100 tons of stuff from France for his building, including Napoleon marble from top to bottom in the interior. It's hard to see here, but you've got a Rene Lalique chandelier as well, which looks like a bunch of snowflakes stacked one on top of the other. This is not James Oviatt, by the way, it was a model. And here's what the exterior of his penthouse looks like. It looks like a Moorish castle. To the left, right here, would be the entranceway from the rooftop into the penthouse. And this is a stairway that goes up to an upper level, a roof, basically the rooftop of the penthouse. Over here, to the right is the clock tower. Okay, you have a little barbecue pit here, and you have a little wading pond right here with a tiny little garden right here. Okay, if you could change that. All right. He's a celebrity now at this point. You know, how could you not be? I should have mentioned that whenever Oviatt comes back from his buying trips, he called press conferences. All the LA newspapers would come and he would tell them all about what he thought about Europe that year. A celebrity. 1929, he's back from Europe, and what do we learn about him? Lots of things. He's good friends with actor Marc Chevalier, who says his penthouse is the best penthouse in the world. He's famous because when he's in Europe, he takes an airplane to go from country to country when he's not driving in his car. He also made a long-distance call from London to Los Angeles in 1927. Now think about that. Long-distance phone call in 1927. It was such a big deal that it was reported in the London Times. It must have cost him $1,000. I mean, really, that's how much long-distance calls cost at that time. Tons of money. He's golfing with people like Al Jolson, and his hero is Abraham Lincoln. Why? Because Lincoln did things his way, he did them alone. That was Oviatt's model. I do things my way, I do it alone. Oviatt has become good friends with W.C. Fields. They smoke together, they drink together, they hang out together, and when W.C. Fields is divorcing in the 1940s, he hands Oviatt $60,000 and says, "Keep this in your safe for me, I'm hiding it from my wife, so she doesn't get hold of it while I divorce her." And he does, puts it in his safe, and then W.C. Fields is suddenly dying. And Fields says, "Hey Jim, remember that $60,000? Yeah, it's still in your safe? Yeah? Keep it. Use it." And Oviatt used it to buy a ranch with. So they
got 5 minutes.
Oh God, okay, really fast. Okay, really fast. James Oviatt in a nightclub with Maurice Chevalier. My name is Chevalier, but there's no relation. And finally, if you're really doing well, you get yourself into a comic strip. This is from a nationally syndicated comic strip here. And you see this fellow coming into the Oviatt store. There were a lot of other things that happened to him, but in the end he says, "But I only wanted a hat." He's buying more than a hat at this point. And there's James Oviatt saying, "But Mr. Jinx, you could be a model for a fashion plate this very minute." So much for that. Next slide, please. Well, everything's going great, but then the Great Depression hits, and the menswear industry is badly, badly damaged. Oviatt no longer is getting in the income that he needs to pay off his creditors, to pay off the building, and he struggles for 3 years. In 1933, he says, "That's it. I can't do it anymore. We are closing." They have a big sale, and they make a lot of money from their big sale, and then he finds a way to get out of it. He reorganizes and changes the name of the business. It's no longer Alexander Oviatt, it's now Oviatts. It's mine. He also manages to sell the building back to the Bank of America. And that's helpful, but he retains control over it and management over it, and he collects the rents from it, as well as paying his own. So he gets a little money that way. It was a sweetheart deal. Everything's great.
Oh, Mark, the bank was down the block from him.
Yeah, down the block, yes. Right across the street from the LA Athletic Club.
I think he had a little something on a banker. There were things going on up in that.
He probably did have something on the bankers. Yeah, he got a sweetheart deal for it. So he saves the business, basically, and they hold a big congratulatory party for him at the Coconut Grove to say, "Yes, Jim, you did it. Let's change, because I have to go very fast now." Well, he's got so much money now, somehow, that he decides that he's going to open a branch store, finally. Not in the Hollywood area, but in Beverly Hills, because that's where his movie star customers are now moving. Beverly Hills. And there it is, 1933 at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, right there at the corner, Oviatt's Beverly Hills.
That's a Walker and Ison building.
Yes, it is a Walker and Ison building, and Oviatt was good friends with the developer who built it, Walter McCarty. That's right, they all knew each other. They all played golf together and stuff. Oviatt Beverly Hills was a good store for him because movie stars went there. Clark Gable went there to have some costumes made for Gone with the Wind. Carol Lombard used to shop there for her loves. I can't tell, I think, again, I'm going to have to rush now, so let's go to the next slide. And here are some of the celebrities wearing Oviatt clothing. The clothes you see in these pictures are literally clothes that came from the Oviatt store. This is a funny one. Humphrey Bogart, he wore this suit in a few 1935 movies. One of them was called Bullets or Ballads. This exact suit. 10 years later, he wore this suit again, and an overcoat from that movie, in the movie The Big Sleep. Nobody knows why. Why did he wear the same suit in these two movies 10 years apart? And the overcoat. There must have been some hidden meaning there somewhere. Walt Disney wearing an Oviatt shirt. Howard Hughes. Oh, yeah. Oviatt got into big trouble with him. Panama hat worn by Hollywood's best dressed man, Adolphe Menjou. And there's our friend W.C. Fields again, wearing an Oviatt designed lounge suit. It doesn't look all that good on him, but he feels distinguished. Quick story, if I have a chance to say. James Oviatt had Howard Hughes as a customer, and they played golf together. One time, Oviatt won a golfing bet with Howard Hughes, and Howard Hughes did not pay up. Howard Hughes in 1935 goes on a round-the-world flight trip. The itinerary is very secret for the trip, but Oviatt gets hold of it. What he does is this: when Howard Hughes flies to each stop on his round-the-trip flight, he receives a cable from Oviatt saying, "Well, you made it this far, huh? I thought you'd be dead by now. Are you going to pay off what you owe me? You only have a few more chances." At every single stop. When Howard Hughes gets to his last stop, he instructs his secretary in Los Angeles to call Oviatt and say, "Dear Mr. Oviatt, Mr. Hughes wants to let you know that he has just paid off your debt and is canceling his credit with the store." They never spoke again. Hughes didn't think it was funny.
Mark, we got to stop.
We do.
We are out of time tonight.
We may have to have a part 2.
we are going to have a part 2, and I want to just give a couple minutes for questions because you've given us an incredible amount of information. And
thank you.
We haven't even talked about Oviatt as a Raymond Chandler villain.
No, we haven't talked about his Raymond Chandler. We haven't talked about how he tried to have his nephew murdered twice. We haven't talked about how he became a raging anti-Semite who sponsored paramilitary groups at his ranch where they threw bombs. We haven't talked about any of that. You may have to come back. Yeah, question, please.
What happened to the car?
Nobody knows, and I've been trying to find out. In the mid-30s, he sold it, and then it disappeared. It literally disappeared. I mean, I've not been able to find any record of what happened to it. I'm going to assume that he sold it to a studio, and the studio probably used it for a while, and then who knows what happened to it after that.
Was that really an accidental murder of the death of his partner?
Yes, it really was, yeah. I've done a lot of research on that too. By all accounts, it really was an accidental death. It was a happy coincidence for Oviatt. Yeah.
Did Oviatt ever take a wife, or was that just not?
Well, yeah, he did, finally. He took, let me see, he was 57 when he married, and he married a sales girl at his store. It was very beautiful. She was only 22. And at first it was sort of a sugar daddy relationship, but they grew to love each other very, very dearly. And they eventually had one child, a son, in 1955. Yes?
What was the practical joke on the golf course?
It's a long one. Suffice to say that Oviatt hired an actor to play a caddy and have him be Bobby Jones' caddy. And every time Bobby Jones did anything on the course that wasn't perfect, the caddy would start ripping into him, because he was a professional comic. And he would just rip into him and say the worst, meanest things. And Bobby Jones was trying to keep his control and be the gentleman, but he was getting angry and angry and angry, and he finally just blew up. And that's when, it was all a big practical joke. Basically, they wanted to get his goat, and they did. Yeah. Any more questions? Yes, that'll be the last guy.
Yeah, when Oviatt, how long did Oviatt keep his business going?
Well, I said they started in 1912, they reorganized in 1933, and it closed its doors for good in 1966. And I'll just give you a quick teaser for it. It closed its doors because it had kind of gone out of fashion, and also because James Oviatt decided to send anti-Semitic pamphlets to his Jewish customers in Beverly Hills and everywhere else. So he basically committed suicide, business suicide. There's a lot more to the story. I'm so sorry it took too long. Everyone, you're great. Okay, everyone repeat after me. Mark. Look at everyone. Mark. Yes. Finish your book. We're going to have you back. Okay, God bless. I think we need a 5-minute bathroom break. Yes. Okay, so everyone just come back in about 5 minutes and we'll get started. Hillsman, we'll get your slideshow set up right now and we'll get started. So just run downstairs, get a glass of water, go to the little theater tour friend, theater enthusiast room, and we'll see you right back. You were great. No.